That was I Shubarelana, that's was Rangashi, Robert Roger, Pandoji, and then to Sheshake, Jikjevene, and Disugi, Rania, and Jiki, or Yabu Jones and Bigot, getting Jag, Sablia, and Nevikiata, onto Shine, Jiki, Genji, Alasoba, and it didn't Hajik, socially Kanga Jevalasoba Juena, and then some Kartanguries, and then Gidu Kabla some Diadelia, and then Tenegi, Jumba, and Delia, Sevocum. And then Delia and Jambatan, the Denigi, new mobi, Shawan, Sova, Ninjas, and Big Jambatan, Zeocum, Denigi, that Meti, Tangaje, Sevocum became Yamlesia, Cope, Yaborason, Digi, and other Yacob Yabotigidu, Pay Yaboresha, and Big Denigi, some Naje, and then Sivinium Chevalia, Pando Chimo, Jamnija Comia, Sivinium Leja, Pemase Pando, Jesada, if you see in Nashi, getting Chimoresha, and Big. Dushine and to some download channel Dushine, Jamori, some gate to watch your yes. That the negi, down to the negi, could do the Litina some mechanic, Loki or yes, some more. That the negi nearly, the negi Kiala, to nearly there, Aji Chang Dorje, the comment in the Kalo, in the Chunang, in the cheese and beginner, and to Chang Dorje Wadi, and Jechimores, Jik tissue.
Billy. Yesterday we looked at a few verses, and in there we looked at how others, out of various motivations, but in particular the verse we looked at was out of the motivation of jealousy, that others act towards us in an unkind manner. They may speak to us in a harsh, aggressive manner, or speak badly about us. And then how to deal with that? Well, firstly, is to recognize that this person is not their afflictions, and those afflictions are dominating them right now, and therefore they are interacting in this way, they're expressing themselves in this way. Therefore, one can, understanding that this person before you is suffering, one is able to practice patience, keep the mind undisturbed in the face of this adversity, through generating love and compassion for this person. And doing so then, one has the space within to be able to respond skillfully. And also, here one can rejoice in the sign of one's ongoing spiritual development, in the success of one's meditations. Because to be able to respond in such a manner requires extensive training. It's not merely having the wish is insufficient. One needs to train one's mind so that one naturally responds in this way. And how to train one's mind is what we've been practicing here.
Roboje Pandor Tungas Shanlia Tiki Joya the Tungasia Pandoria, Anna Sosuki, Shein Diki Page Tanji Consola Lap Teche Dushine, and the G. Lobsang Dorje Dushine Page, I only mention Tang, and the Gana Sopa Sim, Shan Duan Sea, Gangan Celia, also Pandoria, Dinatone, and Dushine, Pandotugure, and the negate also Dinache Madovati, Carchores, and Gubio Susu. Some Tanjin and some Lutone and Delia, Susuki, Chik Pandor, Che, Jamni Chukomiata, Deneke or Denekewati Shazam, and Delia gave he Tibu Tiki to constitution or shores and begin Molandiana Sopa, Lucian, that only Rangi, Lu Loje, Kesa Tamja Shanlia Pat, Dangje, and consulate Tiki to you, Tiki on shores, Epeke, Tiki to you, that Duasia, Dushine, Chesapani. Pende Madu, Gula, Sim Manam Gula Push, Sim Jatamchilia, Patayada. Dene, and the Simji that Tushine. Da, Denega Ganga, Mosu Ganga said to ya Ganga se, Mosu Ganga se Matuvenia, Consuta, conjugate console, Nepik, some long amber, Deneke Chikarin, Yabainada, and Deneke Tibu Tungai, Legi Tibu Tunganar to Chazas and Alia Minche, the Tushine, Shantik to a new more shores and big Tushine, some Nalia. Dushine, Sanwe Dala Lemba Shose, Samlonane. Have Samlonane, also Pando to give, also Pando. Dine Mosumado, Sembi Tone, Giwati, Pashan, Patnaya, Shengi Dumada, Gangadi, Suang, Liege, and Minchi Shandan, Yomo, Shosbe, some Dadushan, Lojang, who said.
We also looked in the afternoon at the need to engage with others in a beneficial manner, both directly and indirectly. Directly is most commonly expressed through the practices of generosity, whereby one expresses one's wish to give of oneself to be of benefit to others by either giving materially and to give material goods, or to help those who are in grave danger, so offering of fearlessness. So this can be expressed through helping people gain access to medical treatment who otherwise could not afford it, or giving food to those who are impoverished. And thirdly is through teaching the Dharma or utilizing your own education to give advice to others and help them. So the three ways to practice generosity are the way that we directly engage in benefiting others. But together with this, we should also indirectly benefit others. And this is done through training our mind. So training our mind in all the various meditations that have been presented, such as coming to value others, cultivation of love and compassion, and so forth. So all the mental training through spiritually developing oneself, one indirectly benefits others. And this can be expressed, as we looked at yesterday, through the practice of taking and giving. So the practice of taking and giving, as explained, is where one generates the sincere wish that instead of the non-virtue that is ripening, that abides on the continuum of others, instead of it ripening in their continuum, may it ripen upon me. May beings gain freedom from suffering, and may their suffering causes they've accumulated, may it rather ripen on me. And then all the virtue that I'm accumulating through this meditation, perhaps through reciting mantra or other virtuous practices, I give it to them. May it ripen on their continuum. May they thereby come to create the causes to attain lasting happiness. So in this way, one both in meditation takes on the suffering of others and gives the resultant virtue to them. So in brief, wherever one can, we need to be of benefit to others, engaging in extensive ongoing training and thereby be of indirect benefit. And when the opportunity comes to express this training, be of direct benefit to others.
Somebody to shin. DJ Vaina, the nigger some of the Shan, Pembe Sambada, Shella Zive Samba, Shanlia, and Dungale, Casture, she sabe Sobike, Shangi never genetin Suba, Gay, some of the Yavana, this was some of the Gidan, Manzulia, Narasha Nigala, Nerapta, Tardota, San Yoko to be Guchazandi, Gavati Unguri, Shazandi, some of the Manzuya, more competent Tanguri said. This some of the saving on Jugula Meva Jigla to Leche Mare, Tangajula Zavi, some of the Yude, Shanla, Bene, Suba, Suba, some of Suba Yore, and Shanla Pembe, some lawyer, Shanya Kanga Sayagi, some of the Yore, in the Atangazudi, the New Chertadi, some of the Yana, the Dushin Comje, the Yana Yado Comiada, and Kohom, you never the Lalin Tatuan, and Lalin was the Tayalas to Shebena, some of the more confident to yes, I don't confident down knowledge. That the ones that take you to be good at doing say and beauty disorders, this patient or yes, I do so much over the other.
The outcome of taking and giving is, as mentioned yesterday, it's not that one actually will experience the suffering results, or the suffering causes ripening on one's own continuum. It's not that will actually happen, but rather one is developing a deep strength of mind that actually I have the capacity to deal with hardship. I can deal with the difficulties of life, deal with any difficulties I face, and therefore one comes to recognize one's great capacity to benefit. So what's being described here is two consecutive approaches that we need to take. One is to train in these various practices, valuing others, love, compassion, patience, and so forth. So we develop a deep familiarization with the practice. But also, we need to develop our strength of mind, our courage, our self-confidence. So these two both need to be developed. And practice of taking and giving particularly helps with developing our inner confidence, coming to recognize that I can engage with others in skillful manners and not be overwhelmed by the challenges and difficulties. So these two streams of practice, developing the various meditations and engaging in taking and giving, gives us the confidence that we can express the skill that we're developing, again, through love and compassion and so forth, to be of benefit to others. And the outcome of all this mental training, which is indirect action to benefit others, is that one will be able to directly benefit others ever more. Oneself will be happier through one's expressions of one's training. One brings happiness to others. And through one's ongoing spiritual development, one will continue in one's journey, progressing towards the attainment of full and complete enlightenment. So therefore, by training in this way, the benefit comes to oneself and others in this and lives to come.
아니 셴 디와도 비 삼로 쇼베나 델레티네 디키투브리스 사상도 준주나라 쇼르와다 지금 데네기 아니 라니 디와도 가서를 동아야 되는데 동아야 찾아 랑 찍부 되는 게 랑 디키투에게 삼로 델레티네 동아요 거레스 제자디네자 도시네다 셴 펜베 삼로디 잠제다디 장고르기 침부리에서 준주나라다 도시네 순고레
As in the verse mentioned yesterday from the 8th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, whatever happiness there is in the world has come from wanting others to be happy. Whatever suffering there is in this world has come from wanting oneself to be happy. So this points to the motivation to cultivate of cherishing others, wanting to fulfill their needs first and foremost, with the recognition that through that one also attains happiness.
상해 줍는 얘기 최소한에 대해 상해 줍는 얘기 가르쳐 버리시네. 지사 당에마 두시네 남든 제디 나상기에 나사 침부를 섬제 경서 이치치와요 말에 스미 마셔야 돼. 당에시에 네두시 제쇼 되는 판도 요르시셔야 돼. 근데 경서를 냠는지 심주체 경서를 라렌다 되는 거인이 수도 라렌다 정면에 이게 나지 다라 다다 되는 게 요배나 경서 냠는 제쇼 켈린젠 되게 냠체 거래스 지사다 네셰바 나진 경서 냠는 제 라렌다 유도 되는 용매배나 눈치 네셰야 돼 경서 켈린체와 말에서 상해 주면 되게 당한소리야 직 멍속에 라와 차상하는 소리야 두시네 나샤버리 지산 온도시래.
Yesterday, we also looked at the famous verse from the Buddha, where the Buddha says, not presenting it in a different way, but the meaning is the same, that I am a Buddha, which means I'm completely free of faults and have perfected qualities. But you, by merely respecting me, will not gain freedom from suffering. You have to train in the way that I'm guiding you. And the way that I'm guiding you is exactly the way that I myself have trained. You receiving these teachings and cultivating them within in the way I'm guiding, that is how you will gain freedom from suffering.
능외니 수의 덴바를 통하전 코로나스의 냠내지기도 두세 레샤 데네 지역구 선배기 말좀 바신의 셰르와 안 데네 아직 데네즈네 데네 야하기 케비즈네 야 버기 케바티 장신의 데네 냠내지 제르마 샬라소바다 사야가유 이마르조 마치벨 라마 캐바남기다 기부담 권소기 냠네제 오다디 다가라시 되는 지역 우트세비게 당한절에 림바시 되는 도시네 기실라를 타바되는 되는 도시나 또 송샤바로와 어디네게 송시 권소기 덴바톤 권소기 냠네게 제제 판도 여배 통화제 안테 제고도 세야지 어디 송샤바레 제사당 하나지네다 아주 가상 기인의 슈바나신 셰샬리아 샹리 펜베 삼로 샹리아 지게 제의 삼바 되네 샹기 뇌바 체류 직서버 공략에 탈람 제님 직나저 냠내레제 배낭아 주게 능 직접에 있나다 소수게 분야 파마다 되네 제 소소 로바르게 됨 엔데셀 미시 당보 서버 건주김 직직 되네 도시신에 될 서버 공략 코르마사야다 안델레야 잠세치야 안델레야 판도시야 som도도 진 장 안데 아직 소수게 안에 코리육샤나다 안된 바도 진 샤 삼다베나 당진다 판도 용도 민도들 팽규여바나 소설이야 안다지 팽규도 약고도 선배기다 뭐 냠내 지와 책으로와 아다디 데네지 세보콤제 안에지게 파 잠반에 저와 제반에 오가 승할 강을 치기 세비 데네지 용배나 아직에 내가 마지나 지간서 책으로 제사당은 주디 데네기 토너야 소수게 도신에 삼마다 정도를 지도 진 안에는 삼단디네고 지게 지수수기다 냠묘토네 도스는 어다디 야고도와 디팽기도와 선배기다 냠묘지리고로 와다 소수시 제배나 어두시어가디 계침을 차거든.
This instruction from Buddha Shakyamuni that you have to do the work. This has been taken to heart by all spiritual practitioners throughout the millennia. So we can think back to the great practitioners that we know from ancient India, such as Nagarjuna and the other pandits. They all read and received teachings on the Buddha Sutras, reflected on them, meditated on them, and came to realize reality. So this was the case for all the great pandits, both in India, as well as those such as Atisha, who went to Tibet, and through their activities, all the great Tibetan masters for more than a millennia have been engaging in the same process as the masters in ancient India, as well as the founder Buddha engaged in, hearing teachings, reflecting on them in the way God advised, and thereby transforming their way of thinking. So known tradition that's exactly how Lama Tsongkhapa trained, as well as all the other great masters, the Nigbai Kagyu Sakya and other Geluk masters, as well as the Kadampa masters such as Langri Tangpa, whose brief text we have been looking at here. All of them have taken this approach. So I encourage you, if you have found benefits in this and in these days together, in what has been said, if this to you at the very least intellectually makes sense, then take it to heart. Train your mind in the way that's presented here. Because what we've been looking at is, if we were to divide it into two parts, one is how to transform how we relate to others, that we come to value them, that we generate a sincere, loving and compassionate attitude towards them. And the second part comes in dependence on that. Thereby, we'll be able to deal skillfully with life's challenges. In other words, the practice of patience. And by training in the way that's been presented, repeatedly over a sustained period, transformation will come. And why can I say that with certainty? Because it's come to every great practitioner up to this point. By receiving teachings and training one's mind in the way presented, transformation will come.
다들 쉬어야지. 다들 안 저기 동반이 이걸 마도 숨을 다들 다들 심기 이거래. 다들 당보님 대다 군야 취계기 뒤에 도비 뒤에 마바신 최남 규모를 셰바이 신비 칭례 조어쇼스.
First altogether, I mentioned bodhicitta can be presented in two parts. Conventional and ultimate. Now, in the final verse, we come to ultimate bodhicitta. With all these also untarnished by conceptual stains of the 8 worldly concerns, and through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging.
대다 군자 최예이 도비티메 마바신 시르다 치기데 대다 군자 시르 디강리에 셰셰기 냠랭기 좀 받기서 당은 두시의 제비 냠랭 제비 갑라 되니게 냠랭 잡아가라 안에 가르쳐오르선 최기기 또비 뒤에 마바가지고 그래서 지진 최기기 와도 마소가지고 그래서 그러다 최기기는 지진 최기 또비 뒤에 마바시스데 다 지진 최기 육군의 랑제라지 되니게 냠랭 잡아 제가도 가로 지진 최기의 마소와 지진 최기 원도 마소 공론라 지진 최기 육군론 매바지고 그래서 마바바서 뒤서
This, with all these, so this refers to all the trainings that we've looked at thus far, such as valuing others, love, compassion, and so forth. With all of them, untarnished by conceptual stains. So untarnished here would refer particular to one's motivation for training one's mind, untarnished by conceptual stains of the 8 worldly concerns. So one's motivation and thereby one's training being untarnished by stains of the 8 worldly concerns.
And 지진 최기의 삼바의 최기의 삼는 기획 뭐래 최기에서 내가 소리서나 다 소설이야 예바다 두신 연구로 지라베나 가보시야 가와다 지대니기 맞제베나 마가와시야 서버다 예반 예나 가와 민예나 미가와시야 대 니샤고래 양지 년바다 년바나 가와다 민예바다 미가와시데 소소리 아키 야고 배 야고 쳐서 배 뛰어나다는 가보시야다 아티키케데 되니게 뛰어나마다 왜나 마가와샤 근데 이 팀마설라는데 마가와샤 이임버와 나 뛰어나마다 왜네 아티 야고 좀 배 야고 쳐서 뛰어나마다나 아나 뛰어나다마설라 지마선베게 semne 마키와 마가와샤 줘와 어디 년버 만나 가와다 년버 미나 미가와세다 도시네 시차거래
So these 8 worldly concerns refer to common concerns in the world. So they come in 4 sets of 2. So the first is attachment to gain and aversion to loss. So this refers to where it would be engaging in these practices, engaging in developing one's mind and engaging in interacting with others in the hope to receive something in return. And this often could be things such as gaining influence, gaining a good reputation, being thought of in a particular way. So one needs to try and free the mind from such concerns, in this case, gain or loss. Another is praise and scorn. So this is attachment to praise and aversion to scorn. So when interacting with others, we tend to appreciate when others show appreciation to us, when others thank us and show gratitude, or if they take us for granted, for example, then we have a sense of aversion towards them. So this thinking, this attachment to praise and aversion to scorn, this too needs to be abandoned.
년바마 교란 담년다 야구도 세다 되는 세번은 년바마세 책도 아이고 되는데 뛰어나 가와다 미되나 매나 미가와세 뛰어봐 뛰어다나 교념는 야구 치기도 결혼로 자야고래야 결혼미 야고래야 결혼배 판도 침보래서 뛰어나다나 나서서 가고시 뛰어마다 매매바나 아디 결혼이 이제 지소소 너를 제베나 아 결혼이 너를 지기도 되는 지기가 말 결혼인데 지기도 알는데 견주셔나 결혼에 대해서 지금도 세다 얘네게 직접 매발다나 아니 미가와 차리고 그래서 되나가 맨에 미가와 얘네 되나가다 미되나 마가와서 소세 기울어서 되어다 배가오치 아니 직자다 소소 되서 마대와다 지나 배직 그 셈야 강아쇼제 되네 삼다데 되나가다 미가와서 제산디 되네게 삼로 기에들라다 지디 최기에서다 지딘 최기 삼로디스오라 제자당은 저기 대신 냠는치에 되는 가슴나 가르제베나 되니기 삼로 기에보나는 뭐 왕도 미교와도 군론리야 이 삼로 매와지고 우리에서 오라.
Yeah. First of the 8 worldly concerns, attachment to gain and aversion to loss. Second is that of attachment to praise and aversion to scorn. So this is where one is attached to people talking well of you. Oh, you're so fantastic. Thank you so much. You're just wonderful. And this is fairly similar to the third set, that is attachment to fame and infamy. So attachment to fame and aversion to infamy. This is more about one's reputation, that one is generally well thought of and not wanting to be generally disliked. So praise and scorn is one set, and the other is fame and infamy, which is praise and scorn being more about one's direct interactions, and fame and infamy about one's general reputation. And then the fourth set is that of pain and pleasure, or happiness and suffering. So this is one is generally taking pleasure or displeasure in what one is doing. So these four sets: attachment to gain, aversion to loss, attachment to pain, attachment to pleasure, aversion to pain, attachment to praise, aversion to scorn, attachment to fame, aversion to infamy. These 8 worldly concerns, they are very commonplace, and we need to try to ensure our motivation is free from them, so that when we engage in our self-development or our beneficial activities, that we are not being guided by such worldly concerns.
Onda denige samlo di nganzu lepe chik leharo chikara chebine soju chue chu chebina da shenle ya chue chebina ja shenle phando ro chebina da denige samlo di leagi pe ma se nyanga chimbole ne soju ge leharo soju ge nan di de a kom nyamne chebina soju ge leharo chebina denige samlo di leagi ge chimbol pe nyanga chimbole pene da garso zen nye ba chuna kawa, dena kawa, dena kawa dige yahu kaye dige da chakwe li hore. Jezada madyo nye ba mara baina da mikawa chaga magawa chagro ne nye bar mimawa na da mikawa chagro mingen ba kosna mingen ba me mere tana magawa chagro and madena mikawa chagro. Eso to shinguro. Jeza dini exam che kanje lengan ju ge chue nyamlen chebe na da shen le phando zhuwe na da nga sam na la ya o da ti nga le ya yen ba ku nge ya ku che so sa di twa nga ra ya dang an ji tam nya da je da zhuwe ya dang so so ya an ji ke le ga ya ku che so sa ji tu ji le hu de jo ro da dini ge ra ya ge sam ni le ta kyo ma le so da so su ge da ke we nyamlen chebe na da Jamba, then do that Jam or commune, Koyahu come the Yamden Chess on said, me doing a rag, Damiana Yohala, Rawajaguru, did some dark your marriage, Chisang, Suzuki, Shenle, Pembi, Tube, Jawaji, Nada, Servo Comiata, Nizio Comiata, the Shenle, Pendoji, the Gavaka, Chevine, Yamden Chikar Chevine, so ya, Nimba Rayag, Tandala, Rayag, some good, thank you, mothers, Nimba to me. 지샬레 판도와 제시 생기 소가 빼야 고쳐서 님마 마제베네 마가와 지교 말에 소르다 데네게 지교 말 미뜨레 다지야서 뜨리 라야게 삼단교 말에스 지산 뜨리 마다베네 메리 다베네 데라 마가와 지교 말에스 지산 두시네 삼노디 단교 말에 에세제 지세 취기 삼네 메바시 고구리 에세디레
Whatever activity we engage in, we need to try to ensure that our motivation is free from these 8 worldly concerns, because there's really grave danger that they can ripen and that they can influence everything that we do, whether it's activities in our place of work, whether it's teaching the Dharma, whether it's being of benefit to others in some way. It's all too easily that these worldly concerns can influence our motivation. And if we take these 8, 4 of them arise from attachment, and the other 4 come from aversion, or usually come from the first 4, not those from attachment not being fulfilled. So there's attachment to gain, attachment to pleasure, attachment to praise, attachment to fame. And when these aren't fulfilled, then aversion will arise, aversion to the opposite. So why we need to try to be free of these very common motivations, or these very common influences to our motivation, is that these are afflictions, attachment and aversion. And they are expressed in these ways, attachment to gain, attachment to happiness, and so forth. The purpose of the Dharma is to free our mind from the afflictions. But if our motivation is influenced by the 8 worldly concerns, our relationship with the afflictions just continues. And also, in the context of the Bodhisattva training, our self-interest continues to be dominant in our motivation behind our activities. So for these 2 reasons, to break our relationship with the afflictions, as well as to lessen our self-interest, we need to be on guard against these 8 worldly concerns. Because, for example, when we engage in trying to develop a loving attitude towards others or valuing others, be compassionate towards others, what other trainings such as generosity, ethics, and so forth, it's all too easy to judge our success and take motivation from the reaction from others, whether we are being praised, whether we think we've been well thought of, whether we're receiving something in return, such as influence. We need to try and free our motivation from being influenced in that way.
다디네 용고로 당은 저기 이내인들이야 레가르스티네 용고로 배낭아 저기 미사지나 이네 제가 아마게 칼라스에시 제베네 투시에세데 땡큐 셋라고로 와디 말라베나 아메 칼라스 제베네 알레 투시 라모스 베삼드네 야 저라 용고로 아데 디네기 아주 조고나자 이나라 가르나 가르체베나 걔도 투시에세지 좀 지라고도 디 말라베 투시 말라베네 알람사 아데니 디니 체베네 알레 투시 라모스 디네 가고 말바 지사 디 레와나를 양아주 셈딩나야 투시 술야 아니 지게 땡아래야 다 근데 지금 저월 갑티고 지금 푸드를 유에 받다. 뭐서 당원주를 유에 가시 뭐서랑 말이야디 제나선 배워라. 가시 뭐서랑 원주면은 셈딩리야 되게 유에 받자고래. 제가 되네자 가르스네 유비 금자 가르스네 아주 이게 투시에 겨로워지 빼면 투시 말았나 셈라 마기와 차기나 디 저월 유에 따래. 되네게선 되네 말아베네 셈라 가야 지금 매번 맞잖아. And you made that to see.
And again, to emphasize, these 8 worldly concerns are likely to influence everything we do, whether at our place of work or in our home or out in society. So to take a simple example, if you cook a meal for your family and you're not thanked, you're likely to have a reaction. You may well say something, you probably will, but even if it's socially inappropriate to say something, you'll notice it, you'll feel it inside. So these 8 worldly concerns are deeply embedded within us. So we need to be on constant vigilant watch against them and not let them deceive us, not let them guide us. Yes.
samnane dine shungorwa de dine tesa dine tadi so nyanga chembore dine chi tesa di wondo ma sanju gure yesa la dine da jidin chuyi ge samlo de kan shungore cha de dine yungore yesa da de da de cha xie dan di mu sum se chi sa da de cha xie dan se di ge karole sin di mu le dine le gore di mu xia chi sa rang ji sin samlo rang timulado yu machine 아니 모인이 좀 마시면 마릭 대진 디목세야 공 모인이 좀 마준바 질이야 진주 현디 삼로 될람 마릭 디목세야 마릭 대진 세야 차고 대진 세야 차고 어디서 저선 될레드는 걸 해라래 마릭 대진 디여반자 될레드는 되샤기래 될레드는 콘트기래 해서 다 되샤 여반자 되샤 될레드는 되네 나야기야다 차도기야다 되네게 아니 직식만 못친 거래 되네 되샤라 되네 고마고야 한 거래 샤래 소시치야 용 거래 아니 샤래 료스치야 용 거래 아니네 콘트롤 되네 아니 가령 거래서네 샤래 료바시야다 제식수 마와라 소바다 용하게 주방한 바되게 리 거래 제사다 대지 아주 삼로나 차산 지차산 되네 리 거래 제사데 되샤다 콘트롤 되네 리 거래 망셔를 제사 대조이네 되샤다 콘트롤 이거야 자원용서도 가고 거래서 대진 마릭바 세디 될레드네 용거래 해셔래
So I encourage you to be on guard against these 8 worldly concerns, in particular because they arise from the afflictions, and it's the afflictions that are keeping us bound in suffering and from which we need to gain freedom from. With the afflictions, there are 3 primary afflictions, 3 root afflictions: attachment, anger, and ignorance. So as mentioned before, these 8 worldly concerns, they arise from attachment, and when that attachment isn't fulfilled, anger follows. And there is a sequence in the arisal of the afflictions. Anger tends to come from attachment. Attachment itself comes from ignorance. And ignorance we should understand as being ignorant of something. And in this context, it's ignorant of how things exist in reality. Can be expressed also as ignorance of self-grasping or ignorance of true grasping. So being ignorant of how things exist in reality, then other mistaken consciousnesses arise, namely attachment, and from attachment, anger can arise, and other afflictions too. And when the afflictions arise, and they are expressed through our physical or verbal behavior, this is when we create physical and verbal non-virtue, because it's from ignorance coming attachment that we may, for example, steal or deceive others, take advantage of others, or from ignorance, attachment, and then anger, and then we may shout at others, engage in verbal or physical violence. So this is the sequence, and it starts with the ignorance of true grasping.
Shenbi Qingli Zhuo Shuosi, Shenbi Qingwa Sai Disor, Shenba Sai de, Wayne de Midimba, Che, Rangi, Ganga, Ranxi, Tangpa, Zimba de la Shenba, and de Latin Duashada, Conrake, this way, Qingwa Sai de Tabalmas or Damjas. Benazo Kirochina, Quat Tau Bene, Jowachigan, Jowa Zuche, Delia Tabachi, Kitty Pat Dashavena, then Kitty. 가와의 친구들은 교과들이야, 근데 가와들이야 타박이 친시하고 담시하고 거다. 담시하되 내래 타는 줘야 말다. 이 타는 줘야 타과에 맞게 봐도 내래 타는 실로 줘야 말하다. 도시에 친되어 봐. 어디 나시 안조 가르친 거라서 안조 가와 친구들은 코와 눈만들에 봐. 아니 친들 담대 봐야 가리게 담대 열에서는 셴바 나 라시인 줘 봐. 짐바티 한 되자도 코라라서 도시는 칭도야 디 담대 말해서 제가 내내서 니 마방바도 되샤당 홍로 니 자와 신바 마 강사 나 라시 주바 템버주바 짐바디 마방바도 코와딜 주투 말해서 강알에 세투 말해서 제가 신비칭 제가 다 신비칭와디 파딜파 매워서 디매 매워서체 디는 조 코와리 조고래서 조쇼서 디서 신비칭의 조쇼서
Looking at the fourth line, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. Let's talk a little bit about this from starting with shackles and then clinging, and then what liberate means. So shackles can be translated in many ways, such as being bound or chains. So we can think of a dog chained outside a house. So that dog chained outside the house, we'll all agree is not free. And why is it not free? It is bound by this chain. And and it's bound within a certain parameter. The length of the chain determines how far the dog can move or not. The chain limits that dog's movement. Clearly, that dog is not free. How does the dog become liberated or freed from this chain? It would need to be cut. If it's cut, the dog is free and will make sure it's never bound again. So this is the position we ourselves are in. The major difference is we have no idea we are chained. So what is it that is chaining us, and where is it that we are chained? So we are chained or bound by our afflictions with anger, which usually comes from attachment, and all of the afflictions come from ignorance, particularly ignorance of true grasping, or here it's called clinging. So because of these afflictions, we are chained, we are bound. And where are we bound? Not outside a house like this dog, but in samsara. It is these afflictions that bind us in samsara. And as long as we stay bound through these afflictions, we will remain bound in samsara. We will not be free. And even to the extent that we can weaken the strength of the afflictions, we still remain, even if we can weaken the afflictions, until they have been cut, and in particular, the root cause of the afflictions, ignorance, until that is cut, we remain bound. The only way to be liberated or gain freedom is to cut this chain, to break these bounds, in particular, the ignorance of true grasping or clinging.
onda denegi shenba dense marik badi chingjenga zu taba na khowale ya damgan chingje di pa meba se khol jogor dadi meba na gane suyogore la duda chiji sumba di sure chenam yumar sheba yis chenam yumar sheba yis de che che tham je yuma na shin ane gansa rangsin yi majuba de jimbi rangsin majuba topi an tongma di topi lo digi kombale tene an jogore 방법을 해서 그런다.
이 담아대 맞췄다 담 actual summit 주원 랑신.
이 주만에 이제 다시 랑신 마주바 또 그 로티 또 이때네 제바시 랑신 마주바 또네 되네 또 로티를 되네 원 방법을 공부할 때나 방법을 해서 이 도리로시.
How does one then gain liberation from the shackles of clinging? That's the third line. Through knowing all phenomena as illusory. To knowing all phenomena as illusory means coming to recognize that all phenomena, everything that exists, does not exist by way of its own inherent nature or natural existence. This is the way one comes to gain liberation from the shackles of clinging.
di tawi ko shiwar da tawa tang zu namba sanji bi che la tawa tang choba se di ngure choba chema me ba tawa dianju sam na se shiwar che sa da di ga le jam ni je chang ju sem an xian le pen bi sem du xin sam ko se ba ko me che sa da choba chobi ge yam le che de da tawi ko she de da di tawa tawi ko she de da di de so 다유 고시고를 지사다 동반이 다와 동반이 도배 시라 고시도 다유 고시고를 지사다 다와 땡주 고시고를.
These final two lines of this brief text, the view of Buddhism is presented. Thus far, what has been presented is conduct. So the trainings to cultivate love, compassion, bodhicitta, patience, ethics, generosity, these are all within conduct. Now we come to the view of Buddhism. And the view can be called different things: the view of reality, the wisdom realizing emptiness, wisdom realizing selflessness, the view of dependence arising.
나 동바 이도 비게 다 되게 아주 규모세디 저기다 규모 때문에 저 아주 데모 따위도 페니디 안에 지게 근데 semje 자로지 신원에 맛이 나야 돈달라 자멘바 근데 용도 규모 때문에 저 당고 수신 바실 근데 저 자로 된지 풀어라 돼 동도 세상 아주 나야라 자 그 특별히 원에 로지 능고를 이나 돈달라 그 주말에 차대요 봐 주말에 원에 많이 봐리 되요로 되지 규마지요로 돼 규마 되는게 빼망고요래 규마다 밀람다 되지게 되는게 타버 주의시하다 되는게 제사 되는게 규마 되는게 제사다 나눠들야 최간에 나와이나 뭐 나와 나신지 가서 나온지 어디니 두스베 삼로 나신지 용그레 베스네 뒤요 말해서 원래 니수디 하고 해서 원래
So what the view refers to is that phenomena appear to us as being true, when in actuality they are false. And this misunderstanding of that is ignorance. So what that means is the way things appear to us appears to be true or real. In other words, reality exists in the way that it appears to our mind. But in actuality, the way things appear to our mind is not how they are in reality. So therefore, this is false. It is like an illusion. And an analogy would be when one is watching a film. When you're caught up in the film, everything appears very true to you. It's only when you recognize actually these are just actors doing their thing, then you recognize, oh no, it's not really happening. But you have this whole emotional response. And this is how every single thought we have, the way it appears to us, we believe is true. This is reality. When in actuality, it is false. So it comes down to this expression. Nothing exists in the way that it appears to my mind.
Bendigo me go do some gore. Me go na go na shin go yor besen go yo ma de wa chin du shin ne ko jo wo shu go yang de ko di chui shin ne ane ji ge Bendigo go shi na yong go de go na wi ne na wa na shin de na le me tin di go go shi yor besen ne di yo ma de ji sa go na ya de na wa de chui shi le ji sa na wa na ko la go na wa na shin go yo ma de dan din na shin a ju 모자나로 주시된 마직 람갈바 즉 모자 쪼꼬다는 실로다의 신디지 찾아 마 조고의 동근는 거를 와실라 능거데 내 신디 조고를 왜선 조고 말 신디 바되리 먼저 모자를 야 조고마다 신다가라 되되고 세상 아주 미리에 나요도 신디 바 조되가 서 능거래 세상 되네 나와 나시 삼로 나래 디 조도 선배 삼다wen 디 너저 와실나의 추셔리 세상에 추비 그 디시오를 되네게 제시를 매 콜로 되는 능거래 전에 콜로도 매 고고도 삼바이나 삼바나신 삼로디다 너서 차저와 삼바나지 전에 요 말에 신디 조고도 삼바이나 삼바나지 신디 조고 말에 세상 삼로다이데 너서 차래 세상 나야라 조와 능거래 매 콜로나신 능거래 전에 요 말에서 진행 유미 베로지 디나티다 빈 되네만 보여래.
First give a traditional illustration or illustration from the text. If in the dark of night one sees a little before one a flaming circle of fire, one is likely to have a response to that. Perhaps fear will arise, seeing this ball of fire before you. But then you look a little closer and you recognize probably it's a child with a stick of incense, a burning stick of incense, swirling it around very quickly. And then you immediately calm down. Your fear is pacified because you recognize, oh, it's not this ball of fire in front of me. It's just a kid playing. Or similarly, if you're sitting, perhaps you've experienced this on a train or perhaps even in a car, it seems like the platform or the trees outside are moving. How can this be? When, of course, you're just in a moving vehicle. And there's this mistaken appearance to the mind. In both of these examples, this flame, this ball of fire, or the moving trees, neither exist in the way that they appear to the mind. So this then is the meaning of nothing exists in the way that it appears to the mind.
나 되네게 동바 인세야디 다지 갈래 하고 해야래야 이내당 도스진에 삼로다나 도스진 직 심주라 셰베나 당한주 삼로나래 당보 삼로가도 고고를 해서야디 이송고를 베네 나와잡게 우마주바나야 당보 가시에달라 신유르신 다기 디시응외라 차기해봐 쇠신차다 라와메바이 돌아니지 그간텔라 뒤에서는 이체리야 최차사지 도스나요래.
emptiness is a difficult topic to understand and requires extensive study and reflection to understand it intellectually and then for it to have a transformative impact on your mind. But an excellent verse as a starting point is from Chandrakirti, from the third verse in the first chapter of his book, Entering into the Middle Way. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine, turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. To compassion for such migrators I prostrate.
Tisada, Anjula, Tangpa, some Karas, Kiguri, some Karas Tangu said that Duchine, Pindawater, Sungur, some Danta Kitty, some Horna, the Canis cover, then Dambo di cover, and even di cover, Dijin the Ungure said, Tangatigor said the Sungora, says the Tangazo, the Sumana, Shinchi, Anzula, some Dala Dugu, Mindu, Tanganzulia, Simji, so Simchi ore. Chesada, Timji Tambo, that's Pendawater, Carson Wars, and Anzolia, some Tambo, Carson, na, Siva some cool age, Tambo some decaying, Siva some kigries. And DJ la Guardian, Siva some kiss, Vijay Garson, Cargiasin, Ni Lapa, Ni Supo, said, and the gay Jala, Ni Punja, Ni Pama, Ni Dropo, Ni Lega, said, Dine, I was in Bibliotheca Kiris, Chesada, Tambo, Siva some Kiris. Chisanta DJ layer, Tangi, said, Ni Chala, Ni Dropo, Ni Pama, Ni Puya, then Ni Subo, Ni Legas, or those Ni Nairo, some Kiris, Shimbanibadi.
For looking at the first two lines, through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So here, Chandrakirti presents a sequence of arisal. So he is making this statement. It's for us to check whether this is the case or not. So the first line, through initially, so this word translated as initially, is literally first. So the first thing to arise is clinging at a self and I. So both words are used in the Tibetan, self or I. The meaning is the same. So initially, we cling at the self, and through clinging at the self or the I follows things being related to as mine. That's a second line. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So we first cling to this self, this I, and from the sense of I, we have my body, my hands, my friends, my loved ones, my work, my responsibilities. So to have a my or a mine, it comes from having an I or clinging at an I.
Jezada, Nay, some corridor, and DJ Galiosene, Jezada, Nay, Jalalia, and the G, Nay, Woolen Nugidu, Casor, Nay, Subolo, go to Seveta, Chapakio, Nay, Subolo, go to Nay, Subolo, go to then Subol say, Kalawu said, Tenigi, you'll chapa, this was a drop was it, then the drop on the chapa, and the G, Yella chapa, Tenigi Jala chapa, the nation did chapa the yes. That they do that needs wool and nudus and then a quarter legal, needs wool and nudus, the needs wool new to Yapum to the quarter legal, the other nudus. Ding drop all the nudus, nay Pama the nudus, nay Chipuya the nudus, and then a quarter legal. Chezan, the negation, then a quarter legal. Cheza Tangpa, save some that get. Then the Dijilang nays and Nayo and some care. Dijilan, Chapa the kigger, quarter kigger, Naja Jete. Chezan, Desudu, Kidu, that to a child, quarter Naja, Dipasa, Leana, but Dipasa, Tisha Chago Sagore. Disan, then. Call pa to corn do go. This is a call a tiger mar. It's been another discussion. Julian as you do score. Get in the Gabriela Miliki, Gabriel Lalaki, Gabriel Yan Mason Masolki, those and Dilio Gordiris. She's not the Chinta de Sheva, Seven Azinda, Desha Shedangi, Chinche, Mata, call it, do score to go. Call a go and Chinta de Diris. She's did it in sure. She's not the new course, Simjan de Rameba, Dunga Bottomeba, Young or the days at the Ninja, Sambegi, Ninja de Pemba say. That in 대신 아주 그전에 잠니제 세야데 주관하자 잠니제데 마스베다 삼마 상보 딜레 초도 주바지 민도 세베기다 셴데니 동안은 나르겐 셈젤야 제기 잠바다 니지기 한 니지데 삼로 야고 딜레 하고바지 민도 디자델야 쳬바 차세 인세데 다 차세데 딜레 니제레 차세와 디수르바다 그 차세고 금제니 그래서네 셈젠데 술에 니지에 점세디 삼마 상보 딜레 하고바지 민도 지사 되네기 닝지에게 영역에 심지 유디게 가리기 칭뒤바리에서는 나진게 나이로 진바게 되네 되샤시에 나나서게 디기 코바려 콜디고도 와서 되네게 루신 송거래
Again, looking at the first two lines, through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So first there's clinging at an I or a self, or grasping at an I or a self. And from this then comes at the sense of mine, my body and my friends, my responsibilities and so forth. From this clinging then comes attachment. For example, my body has these needs, these wants. My body needs this. And then there's attachment. I want this. And from attachment and aversion can come. My body does not need this, does not want this. Or this is harming my body, and anger arises. And likewise, when we have this initial clinging at a self, follows attachment to mine, we have my family, my loved ones, my group. And then attachment. I want my group to be successful. I want all that's good for my family. That's attachment. Or aversion can come. This or that person is harming my family. This person is going against my family. And then there's aversion arising. And likewise, in terms of our responsibility, these are my responsibilities. I must have things go how I want to fulfill my responsibilities. Or that person is telling me no and getting in the way of me fulfilling my responsibilities. Aversion arises. So this is how we see this sequence. Through initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine. So when we recognize this cycle we are in, we see then now the third line, that we are turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. So we think of these water wheels, this big round wooden structure with little buckets on it, and the water stream flows underneath, causing this wheel with all the little buckets to circle. We recognize this is how we are. Through continually clinging to an I, and there's attachment for mine, all the afflictions come. And in this way, I'm creating, these are my bounds or my shackles that are keeping me bound in this water wheel or samsara. And we see how we circle from life to life to life, continuously making causes through our afflictions to be reborn and to suffer in samsara. We recognize our pitiful situation. So that's the third line, turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. Then we lift our gaze and recognize this isn't unique to me. All of us are in this position. And hence the plural in this in the third line, turning helplessly like buckets on a water wheel. All sentient beings are bound on this water wheel in samsara. And now the fourth line, to compassion for such migrators I prostrate. Now compassion arises in relation to oneself and all beings. And compassion, again, is defined as, may all beings be free of suffering. So here the wish arises, may myself and all beings be free of suffering. In other words, free of this process of grasping at I and mine, and thereby being bound in samsara, this water wheel of suffering.
안디난데 조디 당아지 당보들이 당보 나 세베 삼리 코고래 디젤이야 네이제 네이 분양에 잘라 삼는 코고래 안디젤이야나 잘라라 차베 차방이년래 차베 차바 되는 데려야 내가 데려 누구 집에 코르게 돼 응구래서 삼는데 또 스키고래서 돼 those Sungorwada, and Dina Shejena, that Tara in the Mayan Susu, some Tavan, Danazu, Sosoranga, some Tadu, Tava, some Garbosa, Nasi, some Chili or what a Nasa, something when a kilo of Nasa. Yet, then all my 2 years, not come down to his. My legal was not to adu, and I came down to his said, me, he to snide and it didn't each along and said, some loyalty, young women is rejecting as the Rappada was some Rappada wishing on the how once or check to Adine, some cool over there.
With all meditation, we start at a course level, get familiar with that, and then naturally we'll start to look at it at a subtler level, a deeper level. So recognize at first, we grasp at an I, and then follows the attachment to mine. So, and again, I'll read the first 2 lines. The initially clinging at a self and I, attachment arises to things as mine, my body, my friends, my responsibilities, my opinions, my views. So we watch our mind and we see how our thoughts have our sense of self, I, at the very heart of everything. I am going somewhere. I am sitting here listening. I am listening. I am meditating. I am a bit hungry. I am tense. I need to relax. The heart of everything is the sense of I, and then the sequence follows from that.
Nga said Titan Nga US and Nga Chasade Chi Nga said some of the best you chimbo yorwa. In a Nga said, we need to the Gansu that made it. Tangas didn't tell 2 words, that 2 years old. We need to the year the kind of Diago Mada. Nga said some call there, as Nga said, Ganashio, and we need to the Ganashio, this some call how to go, Mada. Jason Delia Nga says some of that we need to Shimju chair do. Then you could meet him by. Then that's what I thought. Damage, I did you got it. Chilipet, our Nangpet, our Nangbenale, Jedama, no dirty about the same time, but Umaba said, Tawi Tama, and I'm just carrying on. Nga said something. Sosora Nga said, Canish to D. Chebaji, the D. Shimju Cheba, the that's also Rangi, how got on with Tony, then Tawi Naja Mira, but I did teaching the young gore.
So we all believe that we exist. I am sitting here. This is something we will all hold to very strongly. Yes, I am sitting here. But the question isn't whether I exist or not. The question is, how do you exist? In reality, how do we each exist? This is where the mistake is. This is where we need to investigate. And when we investigate how we exist, this is where we come to recognize that the way that I appear to my consciousness is not how I exist in reality. The way that I appear is not how I exist in reality. So again, it's not the question, do I exist? Am I here or not? But it's how do I exist? It's in this how we exist where the mistake is to be found. So this is the view of the Buddha Dharma, the view of reality. And it's what is investigated by all the masters. And the presentation is according to differing views. There's the presentation of the Vabhashika, the Sautrantika, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka. These various philosophical views which are there to guide one to come to recognize in reality how one exists, or how all phenomena exist.
And then some that I said, I said, they can to say that it is him to share it. That is some time shower down, so some time in the Ganeshin satisfaction. So again, some laya, I said, they can to send Bigita to Shimju, that daily I seem to share or her.
So in this reflection, the point of departure is to investigate oneself. This is where one starts. How do I exist?
And that was some that I said, Angelia, I did answer to do something that the country cows can do something that 다양한 수불을 선택해 라바디게 나레베스네 결혼 라바디 결혼 레벨라 내가 좀 뒤웠다네 레레게 말레기로 와다 라바디 결혼 레벨스는 나 말에 띵이 라바를 맞다 나 말와라기로 와다 되네 안에 다 강바다 라바디 결혼 레벨스는 말에 게 강바를 띵이 강바를 띵이 라바를 맞다 나 말레기로 와다 대상 아래 삼가서 세베 삼나 말레기로 와 되네 안 수부 차상 나레벨스네 결혼 레벨스네 띵이 수부를 맞다 나 말레기로 와다 And then she went that Subuin and Subudine Shada, Chada, Baba, the Rugoda, the Nigi, sound of a Tisha Namares, Timamares. Now, Canishore, so some Nalia, so some Na said the Canishore, but Nankore, Zinkore, those and Shimji said.
So we identify very much with this body. But if we ask ourselves, so what in this body is a you? Where am I to be found in my body? Am I an individual part, an arm? Of course, that is just a part. What about another part like a leg? No, that's just, again, a part. What about beneath the surface of the skin? All these various organs and fluids and components. Which of those can we say, that is me? Of course, we'd all say, no, those are just parts. And what about the whole body, the composite of those parts? Well, that is still the body. It's not who I am.
Shen Chilogi, Jalamobo, Kangpada, the Suya, Nadi, that Joa Maing, Joa Metige, Susu Pumbo de la Joa Metige, Korong Masedi, Pumbo, Dine Kala Yamato, Korong, when you took to Yuba, Rush, Nangora, Nangore, Nase, Nana.
Put them up. Squad software, delegate.
Said the Susu Samlolia, Nang Ganish, Samlon, that Tabudusine, that Ganish do Sebe Samloya, Nangu Sebege. By Shimju Chedu Kabla, Tangadi, Na Sadi, Sosugo Subudile Loso, Subotan Joa Medica, Subudele Matuke, Matu Bachik, Na Sat Yabachik, Subotan, Denigi Chilo, Kangbat and Jalad, Kahaya Matu Bachik, Korong Nasadi, Pumbotan Joa Medican. De Korong Chik, Korong when you drooped you by Yabarush and Nangor, and Nangore.
When we sit quietly and we think to ourselves, so how does the I, the self, appear to my mind? And it appears as if it is something separate from, distinct from our aggregates, our body and mind. It appears to be something distinct from our body and mind.
So, Deni Lola dus Nangore, Din Nangsu Dilla. Dembatruba Nawa, Nangsu Sior, Dembatruba Nangsu Sior, Rajing Na, Rajin Truba Nawa, Dembatruba Nawa Sior. That the Niki Nawa Nashin, Tahara Yore Sempigi, and some Dilia, Nasiadi, the Niki Pumbona, Chashia, Kala, Madu Koron, when you do to Nawa Nashin, Tahara Yore Sembe Samnochiorda, Manzulia, Samnochior. This Samnotilia, that Kasa Tenzin Satido, Kasa Dembatruba, Tenzin Satidi, the she Mazu Umachuba Nama. Tangpa ngaje dala shengyur ching sepa sam dide da. Tenegi nga seyade, kala ya maduwa rangweni dhuba shi nang yudu. Nangwa nashin dala yore sepe samlo dide da. Samlo di chingore. Dela ming tenzin lagire, tazin lagire, kansa tazin lagire, tenpa dhuba tenzin lagire. Dali shenpa chingwa she, shenpa se dide. Peshina tamatile, shenpa chingwa li dhogore seyade, kowa li thoyage, chingjege, shenpa se dide. Umachuba nala tangpo ngaje dala shengyur shese, nga se kaneshio, teneshi zimba chiore, esi orti, tela ne ngai teneshiore di, lo di la tenzin lagire, ne kansa tatu dhuba sepe, tasi tenzi se, dire.
We sit quietly and we try to get a feel for how the self, what the self is, how it appears to us. Again, we see it as something independent of the aggregates, separate, distinct from the body and the mind. So this is the how it appears to our mind, believing that this is correct, this is true, this is in reality how the self exists. This believing is the grasping or the clinging to the self as existing in the way that it appears. This is the meaning of true grasping. True means that what appears to our mind is in accordance with reality, it's true, and then we cling or grasp at it. It can also be called self-grasping, because in particular we're talking about the self or the very nature of the thing. The self appears to be independent of the body and mind, and then we grasp at it or we cling to it as existing in this way. So when we think of this verse from Chandakirti, the very first line, through initially clinging at a self and I, this word clinging, is the clinging can be called then grasping, true grasping, or self-grasping. And when we believe that this is the case, and that the believing makes us grasp, and this is what we need to gain liberation from, this clinging. Now, in our 8th verse from Langri Tangpa, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. So this clinging, again, is the grasping at the self as existing as something independent from the body and mind, from the aggregates. So from this true grasping, as in the text, clinging, arises attachment and anger and so forth, of all the afflictions and the accumulation of karma that keeps us bound in the cycle and in cyclic existence on this water wheel of suffering. And it's this true grasping that we need to abandon in order to attain liberation, to gain freedom.
Dati samno di denige nga se de kangla ema rang korong ngwe drub de yoba chi nawa na shin da yore sembe samno di da ko lo no zhe re sha ngwe ra denba re sha se be da de ko simju shi ho borwa da simju chi de no zhe re da ma re se ba che di ko samba na shin ko de nga se di denige kangla ma rang ngwe drub yore samba na shin jimba na shin ji dandala ngai de rang ngwe drub de yore yo ma re 이 제바 제야데 데니 제바 제네 고 짐바 나신 은에 랑은에 두바 콜은 나네 짐바 나신 다하라 메뉴 선배게 매바 통소나 다 매바 도바레스 돈이 도바레라 거래 이 매바 마통나 돈이 도고 말 즉디 디 매바 통이 고 나와 나지 고 짐바 나신 민도 선배 데니게 통에도 다 돈이 세 도고 그래서 니 도베 로디 야르게 따르다 뭐 컴퓨터 야르게 따죠 컴바이나 그 다센데 다센데 매바 쓰고 그래서 다센 자와데 매바 쓰다 되는 되샤 공정 아게 개요 말이스 되는 디바사요 말이스.
The way the self appears, the self or the I appears, is as if it's independent from the aggregates or independent from the body and mind. This is then needs to be investigated. Does the self then exist in the way that it appears or not? Is this appearance true? Because I grasp at this appearance as true. In other words, I believe that the self does exist in the way that it appears. So is this true or not? And this process of investigation is done via many points of analysis, and it leads to the conclusion. The self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this consciousness that realizes that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears is a consciousness understanding emptiness. And this consciousness is in accordance with reality, so it's called a wisdom. a wisdom realizing emptiness, or it can be called the wisdom realizing selflessness. This then, by engaging in this process of investigation again and again and again, one starts to weaken, and eventually one will eradicate this ignorance, or as in our text, clinging. And in this way, we destroy our ignorance and all the resulting afflictions and accumulation of non-virtue.
nga sayadi dandala samlo nala karta nangaya la karna ngosne nga sayadi nga zo phungbo na chache kangla ma khoro pa ming ta ba la ma de bo khoro ngwe ni tu de ba chi rawa chi tu de nango arite nawa na shin chikta shala phungbo da de ne ki ming ta ba lo la ma de ba ge chi nga de yo ma res da dandala nga de kanis yores ne chi da nga yore yo ma nga de yores nga yore kanis yores ne 가야 뭐도 라면이 두두에 매발에 이내 만주기 풍부 취 현실을 봐 되네 뢰 따바 좀 뒤에 말해서 숨고다 니하고나 만주기 녀모게 차상 가야 돼 다음에 봐도 그걸로 되기고를 니게 말할 때네 띵오 공부도 당비야 공부 공부도 되네 녀모도 총총을 다 봐야 돼 디방도 그래서 숨고를
that when we look first to see how the self appears, and we recognize that, yes, I believe this is how I exist. So this is called true grasping, because the way we believe something exists, we believe is true, and then we grasp it or believe it. When we investigate and recognize it does not exist in the way that it appears, we know that this true grasping is an ignorance. It's contrary to reality. And our investigation that is in accordance with reality, that is a wisdom. So when we, and now to look at our third line, when we believe that something is true, when in reality it's not, we can liken that to believing that an illusion is true, when in reality it is false, it is not true. So if we take the illustration of the swirling this ball of fire, and we believe there's a ball of fire in the sky before me, in the space before me, and then we recognize, oh no, it's not. That's not true. It's false. It's just a swirling stick of incense. This is the mistake we keep making. We believe that what is like an illusion, we believe it to be true. So when we engage in this reflection again and again, we'll see that the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is not something independent of the body and mind. It is empty of existing in that way. Then that will lead us, this understanding of emptiness, which again, emptiness means empty of existing in the way that it appears to mind. Does not mean it's non-existent. It does not exist in the way that it appears to the mind. But the self still exists. So then how does the self exist if it's not in the way that we believe it to? And that is merely, the self merely exists dependent on labeling or imputation by mind. The way the self appears is as if it's independent of the body and mind. But the way it exists in reality is dependent. And dependent on what? Labeling or imputation by mind. So as one meditates on this, the result is our afflictions weaken, because one comes to recognize that the self doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Therefore, there's no need to be attached to the self. and also other things that we think of also don't exist in the way they appear. So there's no need to be attached to them or angry when things don't go away, because nothing exists in the way that it appears. What is there to be attached to? We're just being attached to illusions, or we're angry about illusions. So in this way, all our afflictions weaken.
Chönam Yumar Shebe Yi and Shembe Chin draw shows Chenam Yumar Yumanashin Hawan topic loss it Tenzin Nakata Tamit Tatomadu Toma Yutubu loss you re. She's not that they on the share and Ashiri Angela Kansadi Kanisna was a Kanlai mother rangung with the Tuba Nangore, now on it Zingore. Zimbanaji Kansadi Kanlai mother rangung the two to Reves and di 제바친 di 마임바 도베 강라는 마디바 랑원이 두바 사오이 민도아심베 도벨로 되라 다 동마이 도베 로시오레 이 공발레티네다 니 동마이 도베 로시안디시오레 셴바시아디 가사 세아디 강라이마 랑원이 두바 나와 나시 랑원이 두두 요레 셈베 삼로 짐바딜라 텐진 마리파스 오레 텐진 마리파스 디 도초 나와 나제 랑원이 두바 주바 나신 자오이니 민도 선배이라는 주바 동화도 로시아도 대대 동유도 로시고 디니디다 도초 진단 가와 차디오레 지산 도시네 니 방고를 해야 돼 근데 다 동유도 로시아 디시오레 셴바시아디 덴지 마리파세 테니시라 워딩이디다 워터 디네셰.
These final two lines, through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. So this meditation is in brief this. Come to recognize how a phenomenon, so starting with the self, appears, which is as if it is independent of the body and mind. Then you investigate to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. And you come to realize it does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. This then is the wisdom realizing emptiness, or the wisdom realizing selflessness. And it is contrary to where we started out, which is believing that the self does exist in the way that it appears. So that believing that the self exists in the way that it appears, we now know is an ignorance, because it's not in accordance with reality. The self is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And these two, ignorance of self-grasping and the wisdom realizing selflessness, are contradictory. Ignorance and wisdom are contradictory. So as one strengthens one's familiarity with wisdom, it weakens the contrary mind of ignorance. And in this way, as one becomes ever more habituated to wisdom, our ignorance is weakened, and therefore the resulting afflictions are weakened. And eventually, that ignorance will be eliminated by the strength of wisdom.
Antene da gansa nga se kala ma do rang ngwe jubadi yo mare sibi da dine ge toye ya tablam so de da nam tablam mangbo yo re mangbo de ne ji de ge dian de ge nam sha sam tan si wa pe shi ji dian qin de wa chung wa xia de yun sam tan nen de do ko re se de za da dian qin de wa chung se dian de xia de yun de ge dian de de da pe dian de xia da de ne ge du xin de sam tan je ji za du xin ne samta din ma do tin nangbo rakpan ma samta din cha samta din thamalya gansa sia de gansa lia nawa na shi yue de xian le due ne xian le ma due ba zhu gu de xian le due ne zhuo le xia du xin de xim ju qian de de du xin de ge da me ba do gu le shi wo.
So that's a very brief summation of the process to come to understand reality. We've mentioned that there's a need to investigate whether the self exists in the way that it appears or not. So this process of investigation is a crucial part, and there are many forms or many lines of reasoning to rely on to do an effective investigation. One of which is that of dependent arising, where one uses the presentation on dependent arising to come to see if the self exists in the way that it does, that it appears. And so dependent arising can be they're presented in different ways, dependent on causes, mutually dependent, and so forth. But through applying this and perhaps other forms of reasoning, one comes to the conclusion the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears.
제자다 덴데세 대한 주기 다 용고비 잘라 가리이면에 규칙을 맞대봐 규매발라 현실에 되는 주마도 맞대봐 주에스가야 말와 다 띵아 저기 제보로시나 가리네 메도로 다 지신으로 가리네 나가주 디 용야야 디사벤치 답 데레기 되네 게망고실에 되는 주고바디 안제다 라바라바디게 하고 거와 도신의 심유시에네 안데 직도를 제보를 해서 제바제야 돼.
This understanding of dependence arising can be applied to all phenomena. So if you think of anything that is manufactured or has been grown or produced in any way, it's very easy to understand it as a dependence arising, whether it's our natural environment, it's our possessions. Clearly, these have come about in dependence on causes.
지자 당아주 예다 윤세되게 다 권유 윤제스게 말이데 이내 예세되어 발어 윤초도 고르와 윤초도면 윤초로 되네 안에 예초도 샤도 거래 맞도 윤초도면 예초 샤야 말이야 다도 윤초세다 예초들에 되네 윤초 샤고 맞도 예초도면 윤초도 샤야 지자 직직이 되네 주도마도 맞도 받지 용어요 말이야.
Another way to approach dependent arising is through mutual dependence, where one thing is dependent on another. So this is different from dependence on causes. So for example, left and right. You can only talk about left in dependence on there being a right. If there's no right, how can you talk about a left?
세대지 삼로나 갈라에 맞여 봐서 차와나 증거로 다 디네 여러베스는 디메 나세 등 아주 풍부를 뛰어대 말했어. 근데 인비 라바라바 삼다는 아주 가르쳐서는 나 조구에서도 풍부의 파악 저디 나 조구에라 그러봐. 풍부의 말어지 되되는 나 되되라 그러봐. 다 풍부의 만 예대가는 많이 해서는 나 예되라 그러봐. 다 풍부의 야라도 나라도 해서 그러봐. 풍부들의 나세를 진짜 두와 말하신 나세는 나 나기도라 그러와. 아니 아주야 소화로 심어서 기부를 신도 나 기부도라 그러와. 나 기부도라 그러와. 진짜 니서 차상 나주기야. 나 풍부도 구겨다 파도데 나 주고에서 풍부를 뛰네 나지 따고 풍부를 뛰네 샤고마도 풍부를 맞대 봐 나 샤고마다. 데네스 제사다 나세디 나 주고야 나 되고야 나 나기서도 차상 풍부를 뛰네 수기 풍부들을 뛰네 나지 샤고 수기 풍부들을 로소 나 저기면 나지 샤두고 마 제사 수기 풍부들네 샤고 제사다 나 초와 기부 줘도 나 기부도라도 초와들을 뛰네 나지 샤고 나 샤고 초와들 마티와 샤라 마티와 나지 시샤야 말 샤고 말 제사도 신의 삼다베나 제일 뛰네 풍부를 뛰네 나지 샤고 봤습니다.但是第三个地라바라바래 제가 디네 삼다 풍보라 뛰네 가지 여봐자 샤는마도 풍보라 마디바 가지 샤 매바로와 샤두고 말 매나다 풍보라 마디베 가지 여마로와다 풍보라 뛰디고 마도 마디베 가지 여마로와 라바 삼다는 대시 풍보라 마디고 호롱은 여래서 삼모디 풍 당아주 풍보라 뛰어 가세도 풍보라 뛰네 여봐다 하고 여디 아 대시 삼 마디바래서 삼모 노지 바다 하고 두고로와 디레다 된 라바라고로 삼다는 거죠.
The very first step in the meditation is to see how the I, the self, appears. And this is as if it is independent of the physical, so the body, and the mental aggregates. So on a course level, we can see that there is a dependent relationship. For example, I am going somewhere. That depends on the body going somewhere, and the body going somewhere depends on the mind instructing the body to go there. Likewise, if one lies down to sleep, that is dependent. I am going to sleep depends on the mind instructing the body and one lying down. And likewise, when you wake up in the morning, that is also dependent on the mind rising from sleep into the waking state and then instructing the body, it's time to get up. So on a course level, we can understand this. And so too, in terms of our emotional state. I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood, I'm feeling a little lazy, whatever it may be. that I am feeling in this way is clearly dependent on the mind. So this we can come to recognize on a coarser level. But where we really need to challenge is the sense of self that appears to be directing the body and mind. Where is that? And this is what we look for and fail to find.
nga sa de nga lo la kan nang go res na kan la ya ma do ko rang ngwen ni tu tu nang go res na wa na shin da ra yo re sem bi ge sim ba than ji ching a chu ge yo re ti lan ji de la da se ma ri ba nga chu ko ge gu ti ti re sa chu da de ne nga do sim ju che ne ko kan la ma rang ngwen ni tu ba na wa na shin ji min du sem bi do de che sa ga sa se de shen ji le de ne tu de ma do wa kan la ma rang ngwen ni tu ba de min du sem bi ha wo lo de la 동방이 또 별로 해서 근데 이 공부할때네 안 그디 디도 별로 돼 가지고 끼고 그래 디고 뭐 그래서 대로 공부하는 다 달바담 제기 보고 와도 두 그래서 숨을 되네 대자 되네게다 또 봐라 저기다 되네게 심주체다 제바제 도시 심주체도 전에 다 지금 퇴삼 망보 퇴야다 개위 신의 디디전에 안에 퇴봐 퇴배 된들래 소속에 삼다 심주체도 전 제바제 된되게 남자 삼다 제바제 노신의 제바제 오래 되네 제바제 아마제 안 되네게 또에게 또 나리야 초사 망보 제오래지 초사 디비 초사 디비찬 제오래서 세상 되네 잠 건전이야 근데 소화돼야 안 소속이 디립다야 된다래야 근데 게셔 주비알아서 봐 노신 동방이 또야 된다 또 제오래서 대송거래
This fourth line, liberation from the shackles of clinging. To attain this liberation requires this meditation presented now. It is the only way to gain freedom. So all of us, we have this innate sense of a self that exists independent of the body and mind, some kind of controller of the body and mind. So this is something innate to us. We all have this. And this is the ignorance of self-grasping, or the ignorance of true grasping. And this is what we need to investigate to see whether this is an ignorance, as we are told, or whether, no, actually, in reality, this is how the self exists. The self does exist in the way that it appears. And when we investigate, we'll repeatedly come to see no such self can be found. Therefore, it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this is the wisdom understanding emptiness. And as we cultivate it ever further, it will eventually be of sufficient strength to completely destroy ignorance. But for that to come about requires extensive hearing or studying and reflection on what one is studying, as well as an extensive accumulation of merit. So for that, again, in the fourth line, we see, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. There we're making supplications to our lama, to our yidam, to the three jewels, and so forth, so as to create merit, to enable or to power our reflections based on our study. This is the way that one comes to eventually gain liberation from the shackles of clinging.
차산 송골 돈다 님보디 차산 송골 나다 돈다라 먼저 계신의 가르 슈바레스나 다 저기 동아 미디어 바레 대화 되바레 제사다 동아 미디어 바인자 동아디 파자와의 세고 매바 세고 그래서 제사다 대화 되바선 대화의定义 대화 인직 님의직 니나 로직이 대화서 많이定义 대화 탈도 대화 등아주 토보고 그래서 제사디 토야래야 다 삼는 땅에 돈이 토고 그래 삼의 냠내체 토고 그래서 제사대 되네 삼는 냠내체다 가르제세네 다 샤심제 탐제랴 진침보제야 잠바 심제 대화 대모시 잠바섬 아야 심제 대주 동화의 자워쇼스 비니지 고미야 다 되네게 심제 대화다 덴바다 녜치비 동화의 자와다 녜치 심제는 이 판도 두긴 심비게 하삼제 대응의 하삼제자 당에 주발라 다당알 니바 카리민도 되게 판도 주트가 솔레스 니바 솔레도스나 상기리도 제자대행의 심자 탐지 상기고 바토바 제인세비 대상이고 도와줘서 자주 셈게데 신바디도스제 자주 셈게 되네 자주 셈게네 당에 심자 탐지기 상기고 바토비 철도 한 가르쳐서 내게 네 소식이 다 우리 론저라서 바샹리아 당진 진배념 다 당기 판도 주기 신바 당에서 달링아 이순유권에 샬라 네비 자와 싸워 지금에 세베 수딩 소야 되네 샹게랑 되네 강아 주변에 되네야 코노만나와 쇠보 kum기스 쇠보 kum야 안디리 냠는 제바 디스 제발이 변에 가신 저신 되네게 강하라 제바들 전주세 전주제 다 되네 신의 주고 해서 띵에 삼탄 신의 주 쯤제시비 띵에서 신의 주 쉬어다 되네 다음에 받다 타마 동방이 또 베셔라 디수 동방이 다음에 받도 베셔라 디 곰발에 되네 다 삼로 디수레 상저 동아 띵이메 바세 투에게 삼로대한 삼로 디수를 내는 세투어레 당연히 띵이 대와 탈바 탐지 산지고 보토에 띵이 대와 초도기고 토에 대 삼로 디수를 당바 되는 다디 톱투고레 제자디 삼로디 먼저 냠는 제고를 해서 다 삼로 당하게 좀 받긴 아주 그생도 주 다시야데 이마 직니스나를 쉬야데 디레 제다즈 냠는 제 디레다 람림 소야 돼 냠는 제 디레 다 준주고 돈을 써야 돼 냠는 제 디레 당하지 다 디레 하베게 냠는 제지 가요마다 삼로 디스탄도 쉬야 돼 제자는 디체 제자디네서 기승한도 디체바디 소식에다 강원도 지도기 소식에다 말로 찾아 가야 지역에다 되네게 삼다야디 계시마 찾아요 거다.
For these final two lines, through knowing all phenomena as illusory, may I liberate from the shackles of clinging. The entire meaning of the Madhyamaka philosophy is presented. So now, to summarize what we've looked at over these days together, started out by mentioning how at a fundamental level, we all desire happiness. No one wants to suffer or have problems or difficulties. This fundamental level, we are all the same. And whilst we chase around after attaining temporary pleasures and overcoming this life's problems, what we really want, what we really yearn for, is lasting, stable happiness. A happiness we have yet to experience. But such attainment of such happiness is entirely possible for everyone. We all have the capacity to attain lasting, stable happiness. What is required is to apply oneself to the proven technique or method to achieve it. And that is just radically transforming our way of thinking. What we've been primarily speaking about in these few days together is how to transform our way of thinking. And in the very first verse, we spoke about how to recognize our interdependence with others, to come to truly appreciate our connection with others and to value others, and have that as a foundation upon which to develop love and compassion. Love being the wish, may all beings attain lasting, stable happiness. And compassion being the wish, may beings be free of all forms of suffering, be free of being bound in this, or shackled in this prison of samsara. And from love and develop, we've also spoken about the need to develop love and compassion further, to the point where whilst our mind is deeply loving and compassionate, we are no longer satisfied just with having a loving, compassionate attitude to others. We want to make this reality happen. In other words, that beings attain freedom from suffering and abide in lasting happiness. And thereby, we generate the determination, I will become a Buddha, the most skilled of guides, so that I can guide beings to gain freedom from suffering and attain lasting happiness. And this is the generation of bodhicitta. And with the mind of bodhicitta alone, this determined attitude to become a Buddha for the sake of others, one then needs to engage in various trainings of the mind so as to make that a reality. And these start with the training of generosity. And there we spoke about the three types: material generosity, giving of fearlessness, and giving the Dharma. So these are one needs to train in this direct means to benefit others. and the various indirect means that of ethical restraint, where one restrains one's body and speech, and particularly one's mind, within the bounds of what is ethical. And then the third training we spoke about a lot, that of patience, a mind staying undisturbed in the face of adversity. And the fourth is that of joyous perseverance, where one takes delight in virtue. Engaging in these trainings, being virtuous, is not a burden. It's not something that one should do, but one takes delight in because of understanding the great benefits. And then we haven't spoken about it, but the fifth training is that of single-pointed concentration, developing a mind that is undistracted, that is focused on virtue. And then the final training is the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is what we've spoken about now in this session. So these are the trainings that all beings need to engage in order to break free from these shackles, to destroy these shackles that bind us in this prison of samsara, and gain liberation from suffering, and be able to guide others to gain such liberation too. And the teachings that we cover here on the weekends, those of the Lamrim, on the Wednesday nights, those of engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life, all of those teachings come down to what is presented here, the method by which one gains liberation from suffering. And engaging in this method, cultivating these ways of thinking, radically transforming our mind, is something we all need to engage in. This is the focus of my life, and I encourage all of you too to engage in these trainings, to develop this way of thinking within yourself, and thereby, through engaging in this process of radical transformation, you'll suffer less, you'll experience ever more happiness. In these days together, all of us, each and every one of us, have accumulated so much merit, so much virtue. And whilst this is invisible, we cannot point to it. These virtuous minds that we have been cultivating in our time together, through hearing teachings, engaging in reflections, and so forth, this has produced a lot of virtuous ways of thinking, all this merit. Now we come to dedicate that merit. Langri tunge dela ta sosorge nyamnen je kulong donye ki tumba ane je denike samlo yeba langri tunge chegor denike zombale dene an so chasanle kewa ya bosawa rare kyozo le kewa bosawa ngale ne kyozo 집대 삼대 요와자 말시아 고브라데 kyozo le dene ma che 고브라 ngale kewa 고합디 미 kewa 사바데 kyozo le dene kewa 사바래 제자당아 교라테 대등아 저기 튀기 되네실 사와 빼야고래 되네자다 나좀 소식이 가와콤이야데 되네 야고 중성 선비가 가와콤이야래 마음에 되네기 무드냐면 지투바 지인 세비게 셈블이야 편받아야래 어도시네 당아주 되네기 지인한주 지시에네 삼다지베데 제제 삼다데데 네 무드시에 네 야네야도 가와조베네 가와되베네 되네기 삼르디 냠네 지인 셈비게 당아주 다 제 투다 마도네 다 셈을 나눠야 아주 도시에 편받던 거데 예치 못 차고 그래. To have been able to accumulate merit like we have over these days, this requires extensive causes and conditions. Without such causes and conditions, we are unable to create merit. It's certainly not like this. So there's a combination of causes which all have to be accumulated, both those which are outer as well as those which are inner. Outer causes include that this Dharma center exists. And for this Dharma center to exist comes about independence on so many causes. There are those who help keep it alive and vibrant now through their various endeavors here, as well as those who over the previous decades have contributed to the Dharma center. So all of these causes, both those that are seen now, as well as those in years gone by, are required for this Dharma center to exist, and thereby for all of us to gather together here. But for us to gather together here doesn't only require extensive outer conditions, but also inner conditions. There has to be there has to be the wish to come here, the wish, the appreciation for what a course such as this can present to you, the benefits that can follow. So there are these various inner conditions that each of us require to come here. This very wish to fulfill our human capacity. And moreover, we should also reflect on our interdependent connection. That you could come here was dependent on your inner conditions, the various outer conditions, and that there was someone who could share some knowledge about this text. And that, from my perspective, that I could share what I understand of this text with you is dependent on each of you. Without students, who am I going to talk to? So we have this interdependent relationship. We're not independent, solo islands doing our own thing, but we are deeply entwined. So therefore, the virtue that each of us have accumulated, myself and everyone here, is dependent on each other. So we recognize this interdependent relationship, this connection that we have. And when we come to dedicate, we also dedicate that we continue in our journey of spiritual development, and we continue to interact together, lifetime to lifetime, growing and developing and progressing towards the attainment of lasting happiness. And by knowing that we are supported by a community, that we are not alone in these endeavors, recognizing this deeply serves to strengthen us, knowing that we have companions, that we have those who are helping us move forward.
안다는 저 사셔봐 될라테네 안에 기회디 둘라테네 가서 찾아 잠니제 장주심라 소바 냠렌지네 안는 냠렌 탈심바 조심제 단절에 판도게 전부 제대로 용하다 안딩하는 저기 되네 개와 될라테네 점랭기 네모 마투불라 소바 시와다 단진 점랭군리야 네바 냠다듯이 동안 네레 파트에시 디기테 템바 용화 점랭군의 시대 용화 쇼어스베 되네团다 되네 심만음 접시나
We dedicate all this virtue so that these good qualities, these excellent qualities that we have spoken about here, particularly those of love, compassion, and wisdom, that they grow and flourish within all beings, ourselves and all beings. And they grow and flourish to the point of perfection so that all beings arise as perfected beings, as Buddhas. And in this way, and throughout this journey from this present moment to the point when all beings arise as Buddhas, may beings not suffer. May they not suffer through conflict, whether inner turmoil or the expression of that, so conflict in the home, conflict between communities or between nations. May that be pacified. May beings not suffer through physical ailments such as illness. May all beings abide in lasting happiness. So then thank you. We can conclude there now. Thank you.